Hello, welcome back to Urban X-Files. My name is Keith, and today I'm going to tell you of another ghostly story. This story goes back to sometime in the 70s, possibly 80s, when a strange event that was witnessed by many everyday people on the streets of Liverpool. Now, sadly, funerals are something that happens every day in the week because people die, obviously, and you might not think of anything strange except when you witness a funeral procession and it's not with cars, it's with horses. You might think this is a person who was old, respectful, and wanted an Victorian style funeral procession. These are normally replaced with a horse and a carriage specifically designed to carry the coffin. But it's not often that everything else would be done with a horse. For normally the horse would pull the cart with the coffin in, and then the cars would follow behind. But not when it's all dressed in old periodic clothes, with many mourners in black in Victorian dresses that were witnessed walking along one of the busy streets of Liverpool. People were sat having lunch one afternoon, and they were sat in a cafe and a restaurant in one of the busy roads, like I said, in the street, chatting away and minding their own business and putting the world to rights. When one of the people sat at the table nudged one of their friends and said, "Wow, look at the funeral procession outside." So they looked out the window and seen a procession, made the sign of the cross, as a lot of religious people do. Even myself, if I see a procession or a funeral with a hearse with a coffin in, or a funeral, people go into funerals and whatnot, I always make the sign of the cross, something my parents done, their parents, and passed on through generations. Now, they noticed in this procession that there was a rather tall looking man that guided the horse. Normally you wouldn't question things like that, but this man was abnormally tall and he was very pale. He had Victorian clothes and he wore a top hat. They thought that was part of his uniform. Now, what they noticed is when the wind was to blow, you would think things would move, like the horse's mane, the hair, the coats of the people in the procession would move somehow. But yet these remained still, as if there was no wind, and it was clearly windy outside. And after this procession had gone past, they thought nothing of it. And it was only when one of the people who were stood outside having a smoke barged in and said, "Did anybody see that horse pulling those coffins and those people dressed in olden day clothes?" They all said, "Yes, of course." "Well, I have just watched that disappear into thin air. It has just disappeared. Please tell me that I'm not going crazy." So they all gasped with this crazy thing. So they all jumped out of the shop to take a look down the street. And they were right. There was no one to be seen. No horse, no coffin, no people, no Victorian clothes, nothing to suggest that this procession had taken place. Yet they'd seen it, they'd all witnessed it with their own eyes. So that was that. They went on about their business, disappeared, forgotten about, mentioned about. And it was only, say, a few weeks later, when people were having lunch in a cafe, as they do, chatting about all their recent events, different things that was happening in the world and what they've been up to. And as they were sat, they witnessed a large horse being guided by a very tall man who had a very pale face, who was dressed wearing Victorian clothes. There was a horse that was pulling along a coffin. You could hear the horse as it galloped slowly along the floor, or trotted even slowly along the floor. And this large horse had various decorations, distinctive decorations on it. It wasn't the normal flowers that you would see when someone's died that says the word Nan and different things. This was feathers and black and dark things. There was nothing colourful about this procession. They said that the coffin inside the hearse had glass sides, so it was visible to people looking. That the floral tributes, as I mentioned earlier, were all dark. And then it was followed by more equally sized carriages with horses as they trotted along a main busy street. And this horse-drawn party of horses, people, carriages and whatnot trotted along the road, and people stopped what they were doing, made the sign of the cross, paid their respects, and paused for the horse and carriages to make the procession safely down the road. So this all seemed real enough, and the bystanders assumed that someone was being sent off in a very old-fashioned style. Now, this procession had said to have made its way through various streets in Liverpool, all down the Georgian Quarter, past Rodney Street, Hope Street, and places like this. It said that it moved through traffic lights that were on red. Now, this isn't, although it's not safe to normally pass through a traffic light on red, but in this occasion, they went right through the lights, and luckily, all the other cars in various directions had made it safe for these people attending this funeral procession to be safe. And one of them, bystanders, had commented, they've gone through that red light like it wasn't even there. They're on roads that don't look to be leading on the same road as what they're going on, if that makes sense. And one of them noticed, you're right. If you look down, the horse's feet seem to be inside the floor of the road, only by a few inches. What is with that? And then it dawned on them that this was not your everyday funeral procession. A car come flying down the road and beeped its horn through the stopped traffic because he was in a rush. And he mustn't have realised that these cars had stopped through this funeral procession. And as this procession crossed the way, and this angry driver beating erratically on his horn to get past, you would think that this would cause some sort of reaction to these animals. A big noise would make them jump and fear, but no, nothing. And what happened next was absolutely something you would not expect. The horse and the procession turned up a road and continued along into the cemetery. Now, you mightn't think anything strange about this, but I'll say this: the gates that the horse went through in the cemetery were locked. They were shut. That part of the cemetery hadn't been opened for a while. There was only a footpath leading its way in. So, needless to say, this caused a lot of chaos. Police was called. They had been called by multiple people because of this strange thing that had taken place in front of everyday people. And this was reported, again, very little in newspapers. The police had made inquiries and knocked on doors and took any information they could to find out what had taken place. They thought that people were just being eccentric. They thought that there was some film possibly being made where it was about Victorian times. Now, the police had a cold case, as there was no way they would be able to find out the answer to this enigma, this mystery even, as horses and carriages cannot walk through solid objects. So what people witnessed those days is that they now believed in ghosts, as this horse and carriage and coffin and mourners all walked through the cemetery gates that had been closed. And it's not been seen since. Now, when the police done some research and tried to track down, in case it was some sort of like joke, practical joke or something, even though you take into the account that the wind didn't affect the animal or anything that was there, the sound of the horn and the traffic had no reaction to the animals and the people. You would think that if this angry driver had screeched to a halt and honked on his horn and shouted at the people, that someone would react, whether it be telling them to off or something along those lines. Nothing. It was like a silent film, is how it was described. Now, the police done their research and the news reporters, and they found that the route that was taken was in older Liverpool. So back in Victorian times, even when the Georgian Quarter was from the Georgian times, that the route that was like noted down when they investigated it, the route it had been, where it had been witnessed and where it had gone, they traced it along, and it was an old cobbled road that was there beforehand, and that would explain why the horses' hooves seemed to go through to the floor, only slightly, but enough to make it noticed. And the gates of the cemetery was the main gates that was used back then. But the way the roads had changed, that gate had become locked and not used no more, because it had been the way it had been built and designed. The entrance was like a one-way thing where you come in one end and then exit through the other, where back then you just had the main gate in and out. So the procession went through the closed gate, and that ended the mystery of the ghostly Victorian funeral procession. So there are people who've said it's another one of the banshee type things, like an omen of death and various things. Some people believe, witnessing these omens, that it is the harbinger of death, to warn other families of things and death that's happened in a family. Or like I mentioned in the other video, where there was a flying nun, and was that something that was like the banshee, the urban legends of Ireland, to say that if you were to witness a banshee or hear a banshee scream, that, you know, someone close to you was likely to die or bad news would arise. So that is the mystery of the Victorian funeral procession. I hope you enjoyed this story, and I do apologise for my and, is, and now stuff things. I get a bit flustered sometimes. Anyway, I hope you did enjoy the story. If you did, like the video if you can, subscribe for plenty more spooky stories on the way. Take care, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.